When you stop overgiving, something profound happens in the dynamic. The illusion breaks. People often assume that giving more will create deeper love, but psychologically, the opposite is true. Human beings are wired to value what feels scarce, what carries intention, what requires effort to earn. When you constantly offer your time, your attention, your energy without pause, you unknowingly remove the very elements that make your presence meaningful. You become predictable, and predictability without boundaries dissolves respect. Overgiving usually comes from fear of losing someone, fear of not being enough, fear of being replaced, but fear-based giving is never perceived as generosity, it's perceived as desperation. And people don't respect desperation, even if they benefit from it. When someone receives more than they invest, their mind begins to normalize the imbalance. They stop appreciating the things they once admired. They start expecting what you once offered freely, and expectation always kills gratitude, but the moment you pull back not as a game, but as an act of emotional discipline, everything shifts. Your presence becomes intentional again. Your energy becomes valuable again, your boundaries redefine the space. She starts to see you not as someone who bends endlessly, but as someone who understands his worth. That shift alone demands respect. Detachment from overgiving is not punishment, it's recalibration. It is an inner declaration that you will no longer earn affection with exhaustion. You allow the other person to step forward, to reciprocate, to reveal whether they value you or merely your availability. And in that silence you learn the truth, because the moment you stop giving more than you receive, you don't lose people, you lose illusions, and that is the beginning of real respect. Detachment is one of the most misunderstood concepts in relationships. People mistake it for emotional withdrawal, coldness, or indifference, but in reality, it's the exact opposite. Detachment is clarity. It is the ability to separate your sense of self from the fluctuations of someone else's behavior. When you detach, you're not disconnecting from the person. You're disconnecting from the emotional chaos that keeps you reacting instead of thinking. Most people live in emotional fusion, where their mood rises and falls based on how someone else treats them. That dependency may feel like love, but psychologically it is a loss of autonomy, and whenever you lose autonomy, you lose respect, not just from the other person, but from yourself. Detachment breaks that pattern. It recenters you. It brings you back to your own emotional baseline, where your decisions are guided by principles instead of impulses. When you are detached, you can love without clinging. You can give without emptying yourself. You can see the relationship as it is, not as your fears or insecurities paint it. That level of emotional independence creates a different kind of presence, steady, grounded, and self-assured. People respect that. They are drawn to that because confidence that doesn't need to announce itself is the most powerful form of influence. Detachment also reveals the truth about the other person. When you stop reacting, you start observing. You see who steps closer and who steps back. You see who values you and who values only what you provide. That insight, though sometimes uncomfortable, is liberating. It gives you the freedom to choose from clarity instead of attachment. And the real beauty of detachment is simple. When your peace is no longer negotiable, your worth becomes undeniable. A woman can only respect a man who chooses her, not one who leans on her for his identity. And this distinction is far more psychological than people realize. When you depend on someone to feel worthy, validated, or emotionally stable, you shift the entire dynamic into imbalance. You're no longer approaching the relationship as a complete individual. You're approaching it as someone seeking completion, and no one respects what they are forced to complete. Choice is powerful because it comes from strength. Need comes from insecurity. When you choose someone, you bring your whole self forward. Your purpose, your direction, your values. You're saying, I know who I am, and I'm inviting you into my life. But when you need someone, the message becomes, I don't know who I am without you. Tell me what to be. That level of emotional dependence suffocates attraction and erodes respect over time. People feel the difference. They sense when your affection is an authentic expression of self versus a strategy to fill a void, and the tragedy is that many men don't realize how quickly admiration fades when a woman becomes the emotional source instead of the emotional companion. She isn't looking to be your foundation. She's looking to stand beside someone who already has one. When you stand firmly in your identity, you give the relationship space to breathe. You're not seeking validation, you're offering connection. You're not asking her to rescue you emotionally, you're inviting her to walk with you. That shift transforms the energy entirely. Respect grows naturally because she sees that your choices come from intention, not dependency. And here's the clarity. When you stop needing someone to define you, you finally become someone worth choosing. Boundaries are often misunderstood as barriers, but in reality, they are the framework that allows respect to exist. Without boundaries, a relationship becomes an open field, unstructured, undefined, and emotionally unsafe. People don't thrive in that kind of environment. They thrive when they understand the limits, the expectations, and the space within which the connection can grow. Boundaries create that space. They turn emotional chaos into emotional clarity. Most people fear setting boundaries because they believe it will push the other person away. But what actually pushes someone away is the absence of self-respect. When you allow disrespect, when you tolerate inconsistency, when you keep giving chances without requiring change, you teach the other person that your emotional world has no structure. And when there is no structure, there is no respect. A woman respects a man who knows where his line is. She respects a man who communicates what he will not accept, not with anger, but with certainty. This kind of clarity doesn't create conflict, it actually prevents it. It eliminates confusion, it removes assumptions, it places responsibility back where it belongs on both people, not just one. Boundaries also reveal the difference between love and attachment. Love honors boundaries. Attachment resists them. When someone genuinely values you, they adjust. They meet you where you stand. They rise to the standard you set, not because you demanded it, but because your presence inspires it. What boundaries truly protect is not your ego, but your peace. And when your peace is guarded, your value becomes unmistakable. That kind of emotional integrity changes the entire dynamic of a relationship. It shifts it from imbalance to mutual respect, because the moment you define your limits, you also define your worth. Silence is one of the most underestimated forms of communication, yet it carries more psychological weight than any argument ever will. When you stop over-explaining, stop defending, stop trying to convince someone to see your worth, you create a space that forces reflection. People hear words, but they feel silence, and in relationships, that feeling is powerful. It exposes patterns that were easy to ignore when you were constantly filling the gaps with reassurance or emotional effort. Most people think silence is avoidance, but in reality, silence is a mirror. It reflects back to the other person who they are without your emotional labor propping them up. It reveals their effort, their intentions, their consistency, or the absence of it. When you stop reacting, you remove the emotional shield they were hiding behind. Your silence becomes the test they didn't know they'd have to take. This is why silence demands respect. It shows that you're not operating from insecurity. You're not begging to be understood. You're giving space for the truth to surface. And truth always surfaces when noise fades. A woman pays attention differently when you go silent. Not because she fears losing you, but because the energy shifts. She can feel that your attention is no longer automatic. Your reactions are no longer guaranteed. Your presence is no longer a given. That emotional pause prompts self-awareness. It redirects responsibility back to her. It makes her realize that connection requires reciprocity, not convenience. Silence is not about punishing. It's about preserving your emotional power. It's the point where you stop performing and start observing, where you stop proving and start evaluating. In that pause, respect grows, quietly, naturally, without force. Because the moment you let silence speak for you, your value becomes undeniable. When you detach and return to yourself, something fundamental shifts. You stop viewing the relationship as the center of your identity and start seeing it as a part of your larger life. This shift is powerful because it restores perspective. So many people lose themselves in the process of loving someone else. They abandon their passions, their routines, their goals, their personal evolution, and then wonder why the relationship feels heavy. When you lose touch with your own purpose, you place an impossible burden on the other person to make your life meaningful. No one can carry that weight gracefully. Rediscovering your purpose is not about becoming distant, it's about becoming aligned. When you reconnect with what drives you, what challenges you, what inspires you, you bring a richer, more grounded version of yourself into the relationship. Purpose creates confidence, and confidence creates respect. A woman responds differently to a man who is anchored in direction. His energy feels stable, intentional, and forward, moving. He's no longer looking to her for identity. He is inviting her to accompany him on a path he is already walking. And purpose naturally filters relationships. When you're clear on where you're going, you recognize who genuinely fits into that journey and who merely distracts from it. This isn't cold, it's clarity. It's the kind of clarity that prevents you from shrinking yourself to keep a connection alive. Instead, it encourages growth individually and together. When you elevate your life, you elevate your standards. You stop tolerating emotional inconsistency because it no longer aligns with who you're becoming. And in that alignment, respect becomes effortless, not demanded, not negotiated, simply earned through the strength of your direction. Because when you rise into your purpose, the right people rise with you.